Written and directed by Robert Elkins. We are talking Alien Swamp Beast, a 2018 ultra low budget B-movie schlocky horror film. What's the story? Now, we have this kind of rural part in America somewhere where there's a meteor that's kind of crash landed in the swamp, and this young man who is a little bit simple decides he wants to kind of go and look for it because he wants to, you know, he thinks it's going to get him riches and everything. And he ends up sort of taking this girl with him that he's kind of friends with. And in the meantime, there is a gang of bank robbers that are fleeing the police and end up running into the kind of this swampland, and they're pursued by two FBI agents. And these two folks looking for this kind of meteor end up kind of running foul of the bank robbers, and the guy, the mentally challenged guy, is killed, and the girl is taken hostage. But this meteor that they have found ends up kind of bonding with this guy's body and kind of creating a swamp monster, actually, that kind of goes to try and get revenge, and is able to retain the memories of this guy. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So this is a kind of silly, knowingly silly, schlocky horror movie. It's one of those films where they actually say the title in the film, Alien Swamp Beast. It's not clearly taking itself very seriously. I presume it kind of knows it's obviously a very low budget, silly, probably quite referential to the kind of 50s monster movies you would have seen. In actual fact, when it started, I actually thought it was going to be like a kind of riff on the 50s monster movies. It's more of kind of inspired by it, if that makes sense. Now, let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is some great movie. If you're not interested in low budget, amateur, homemade, whatever you want to call it, style films, this isn't going to change your mind. But what I will say is I actually felt this movie actually had quite a lot of heart, which is something I can't say for every film. In fact, probably most films. I actually kind of felt like they actually did a fairly good job of making me feel sympathetic to a swamp monster. And I think that's partially because we're introduced to him when he's human, and he's just this guy, you know, he's you know, he's a little bit challenged, you know, he's just very kind of like living a simple life, but very kind of friendly, you know, doesn't want to hurt anyone or anything like that, and he ends up, you know, as I say, being killed. It's a little bit like Dark Knight from the Scarecrow, have you ever seen that? And, you know, you definitely feel sorry for him, and, you know, even when he's becomes this creature and no one sort of recognises him, and he's trying to sort of communicate, but he can't speak. You know, everyone's kind of afraid of him, and he's trying to kind of, on one hand, you know, try and save his friend who's been held hostage by these robbers, but at the same time, like, she is kind of afraid of him. His parents come looking for him, and they don't realise that it's him. The FBI agents don't realise that it's this lad. So I got to say, despite its severe shortcomings and obviously ultra low budget, you know, I actually felt this movie actually had a little bit of heart. You know, it kind of made me feel a little bit of sympathy for this character. I kind of quite like the relationship between him and this kind of girl, even though it's not massively developed, to be honest with you. But I still kind of felt like she kind of, you know, sympathised with him and kind of like, you know, wanted to help him out because, you know, she kind of felt he was lonely or something like that. So I kind of quite liked it. I thought it has kind of heart in it, and that I appreciated. The movie also has a few funny moments in it. So this is, you know, a film that I say isn't taking itself particularly seriously. And, yeah, there's genuinely a few kind of like chuckle-worthy moments. Probably people would think, if you've seen this, the very final scene of the movie, which is kind of funny, to be honest. But there's also a few, you know, movie moments within the film that I think are quite kind of funny, that I kind of appreciated. I mean, this is not like rolling on the floor, laugh out loud funny, but, you know, it was at least enough to kind of keep me amused. And I was fairly kind of, you know, engaged with this movie, despite its obviously shortcomings. Now, VFX-wise, again, this is where you're going to have to appreciate a low-budget fare. Now, the creature effects. If you were at a Comic-Con and you saw someone walking around with this creature, you would think it's great. When you're watching it in a movie, you know, unless you're versed in the B-movie films, then you might think it looks a little bit kind of homemade. So that's where it is. I mean, again, I kind of appreciate it. It 100% looks homemade. I still kind of liked it. I can see that you know, it's made to be a little bit schlocky. I think it's made to kind of reference the 50s style kind of monster man in a suit style movies, you know, robot monster and all the rest of it. It's obviously kind of referential in that, but I still kind of liked it. You know, I still kind of liked the design. I appreciated the kind of the homemade look for the kind of like the horror comedy that this is kind of going for. But, you know, there's a lot of people here that I think take the movie in regards to characters, you know, relatively seriously. So I think it kind of hits a fairly good balance with the kind of the tone in the movie, if that makes sense. I mean, it's not exactly a realistic film, and you know, when I say not exactly, I mean it's not. But at the same time, you know, it's kind of like the characters are taking it seriously enough where you can kind of buy into them as a character and stuff like that. So I think they actually got the tone reasonably well. There's a couple of attempts at gore here. It's all very kind of you know, low tech and low budget, but I appreciated it and nonetheless. These kind of bank robbers as well. They're actually depicted to be pretty ruthless. I mean, they murder people in pretty much cold blood. So they're not kind of like messing around when it comes to, you know, I mean, it's not exactly a hardcore film in regards to violence, but nonetheless, when you take it, you know, if you were to describe this scene, they gun down a kind of like a mentally challenged guy, they kill a kind of a police officer in cold blood, things like that. You know, it sounds pretty brutal. So it doesn't necessarily scrimp on the level of violence. It's just obviously the style of the film is very schlocky, so it doesn't seem particularly kind of you know, impactful in that respect. Okay, so let's talk about what doesn't work. I mean, the obvious thing here is going to be the low budget schlocky style of the movie. It is practically a homemade film. This is probably made for a few $1,000s, I would imagine. I don't know the budget. It's probably made for no more than like 10 grand or around that kind of figure. Probably less. So everything about this movie is low tech, low quality in regards to some of the technical elements. You know, so it has its shortcomings. One last positive, actually, I just forgot to mention, I quite like the music. I think the music was actually pretty good in this movie. But yeah, getting back to the negatives, like I said, if you're not interested in the sort of like the low budget B movies, then it's not going to be of interest to you. I can't honestly say this movie is good in any kind of genuine technical elements, because it's not. A, I don't think it has the budget to, and B, it's not really trying to be a professional film. It's trying to be a B movie. It's trying to be a 50s-like monster movie. So in some ways, it kind of succeeds in that. But obviously, I think when you look at this just in the context of how it relates to kind of films generally, it looks rough, you know. There are some things here that I think could have been better, even with the not changing the budget. For example, I actually kind of would have liked them to have developed the characters a little bit before we kind of get to know them. This kind of girl, are kind of like the guy who ends up getting turned into this kind of swamp creature. I would have liked to have got to know them a little bit better. They try and give you a little bit of scenes with one of our FBI agents, but I think it was misjudged. Like, we see him making coffee, eating breakfast, petting his dog. It's not characterization, it's just like filler scenes. So there's some stuff here that I think could have been edited. There's some stuff here where I think it could have been added that really wouldn't have affected the budget, and I think would have made it more of a film that could be digestible and at least kind of be comparable in regards to kind of like narrative and a mainstream movie. Now, if you don't have a huge amount of budget, you know, you can work around that in regards to writing and things like this and kind of clever filmmaking. And this is not trying to be a clever film, but I still think it missed a trick here with developing some of the characters and kind of making you feel a little bit more towards them. And I think that would have been a trick. It could have been 5 minutes. 5 minutes more in these scenes to kind of give us a little bit more context as to who these kind of people are. Now, the tone, I think, more or less is right, as I've kind of mentioned. I think it kind of gets a fair mix between drama and comedy. It's obviously, you know, not taking itself seriously. But there are elements here that I just think were a little bit on the sillier side, like our robbers, our criminals. One of them was wearing like a bright pink wig. I mean, I get they're wearing disguises, but surely why wouldn't you take it off after the robbery? It's clearly an extremely kind of recognisable thing to be, you know, to have on. I mean, so there are elements here that it's kind of spikes into absolute silliness, you know. The tone is relatively sort of goofy as for the whole movie, but it's still kind of like serious enough where you can kind of watch it for the plot. But there are just kind of like these odd things here and there that you just think that just go into silly mode. And I'm not talking about the kind of the very final scene, which is silly, but I think it kind of works for just a little bit of a gag. But you know, there are a couple of things here I wish they kind of dialed down the silliness just to make it more in line with the general kind of like the film as a whole. I mean, there's one guy who gets like died from like one of the cash bags that they've robbed. He gets splattered with blue, and they keep calling him Smurf. So that's fine. I mean, that was kind of quite funny. But the girl with like a pink wig, why would you take that? I mean, even in a silly, goofy comedy, why would you leave that on? But you know, things like this. There's a couple of instances like that. I think maybe our swamp monster could have been on screen a little more through the movie. He's in it a reasonable amount towards the end, but I think it could have been a little sooner. I mean, no one's watching this for a bank robber tale, if that makes sense. I know, although I kind of quite like what they did with some of these kind of moments, as I said, the level of violence and stuff. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the creature, or maybe seeing him turn into the creature and things like that. Again, I appreciate that might be a budgetary issue. But so I think this movie was never going to be a great film in regards to, if you're just looking at the hard, cold facts about is this a good film, and you're kind of using a scorecard or something like that, it's not going to score massively high, but I still think it's watchable. I actually do appreciate the kind of the level of heart and kind of earnestness this movie actually has that makes it kind of watchable. I think there was more it could have done to sort of like still have those elements and plus them a little bit more maybe. Now, how to score this one? Now, I've got to be honest with you, even though I do find this film actually quite watchable, I can't honestly say it's a good film per se. I do think it would appeal to certain audiences, those of you who like low budget, trashy Z-grade movies, but you want to watch something with a little bit of heart. But overall, I've got to be honest with you, it isn't a film I would necessarily say is a good or great film. I would give it a 4 out of 10. But I would say if you are of the mindset of a B-movie fan, then you might want to check it out. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me comments and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.